All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep, it's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do, operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like tabular review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
I feel very antiquated in my use of text edit now that... That's
text
real.
hey, next product.
It is. It's unbelievable. There's so much still there.
So, Chess from Next.
Totally.
Mail.
The screenshot icon finally changed. It was that like big camera until Yosemite, and it finally changed that little thing. That was like the last asset remaining.
Crazy.
I know.
Who got the truth? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Who got the truth now? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Sit me down, say it straight. Another story on the way. Who got the truth?
Hello, GeekWire.
Hey, GeekWire. Woo!
Awesome. Well, welcome to episode 23 of Acquired, the podcast about technology acquisitions. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. On today's episode, we will be covering a cornerstone of technology today, Apple's 1997 acquisition of NeXT. So, yeah, I think this is one that we've been talking about doing for a very long time. The original tagline of our show was technology acquisitions that actually went well. And we've deviated from that a little bit, and we've gotten into talking about all sorts of acquisitions, recent ones we think didn't go well. But this one is super, super true to our roots. So excited to be here and talk about it today.
Yeah, this is going to be a blast. And big thank you to GeekWire and John and Todd and everybody for hosting us here. This is our first live show, so we're streaming on Facebook. You guys will get to see how the sausage is made. Thanks for sticking with us. And we will post it on iTunes and our website, acquired.fm, once we edit it. With that, we'll dive in. So... Next, like Ben was saying, I've been looking forward to doing this one for a long time as both devoted Apple users, both of us. This is really the story of how, what I love about it is it's kind of like this is the hero story of Steve Jobs. He had initial success, the initial arc, and then he was off in the wilderness at NeXT for 10 years. Then he comes back to Apple And here we are today where Apple is the most valuable company in the world. How did this happen?
And truly like a drama, right? I mean, you can't script this stuff. They've literally made 3 movies about it because of how kind of crazy this journey is. So we want to focus just today on kind of the part picking up at when Steve started NeXT and how that went, integrating that into Apple.
Yeah. So we start our journey in 1984. A very good year. That was the year I was born. And Steve Jobs is still at Apple for the first time, the company he co-founded with Steve Wozniak. And what's going on at this time is the personal computer has happened, driven by Apple and the Macintosh. Apple's a public company, very valuable. But computing has entered a new wave, and we're in the era of the workstation at this point. And I had to do a bunch of Googling and Wikipediaing because I really had no clue what a workstation was. I think there were a bunch of these in college in the computer lab somewhere, and they were made by Sun, and I didn't really know what they did.
This is dating us a little bit.
Yeah, dating us a little bit. So workstations, it turns out, are really just personal computers on steroids for the time. Now they're like pitifully underpowered. But what kind of defined a workstation was a, quote, 3M computer. And a 3M computer had 1 megabyte of memory, megabyte of memory, had a megapixel display that could display 1 megapixel's worth of content, and it had a megaflops of computing performance. That is floating point operations per second, Ben. And sometimes people added a 4th M to the definition of a workstation, and that was a megapenny, which was how much these things cost, which was about $10,000 a pop. So these are not personal computers. They're mostly used at universities for research, for scientific research, for technical research. Large corporations use them. But these aren't the server mainframes of the old day. These are single-use computers that are networked that people can log into them, but one user uses them at a time.
Gotcha.
So that's what's going on. And Apple is kind of in a quandary because this is the computing era of the workstation, but Apple has no offering in the workstation. They're a PC company, and just down the street from them, Sun Microsystems has been started from Stanford University Network, hence the Sun Microsystems. And Sun is the darling of technology. They are the fastest growing company in America in the 1980s. They go from founding to $1 billion of revenue in 6 years. So Steve's still at Apple. All this is going on. He's no longer the CEO. John Sculley is the CEO.
And to put this in context around times that computers have been released, this is right after the Macintosh's release, right?
A couple years after the Macintosh is released. So this is 1984. And Steve gets put in charge of a new division at Apple called the SuperMicro division. And that combines the Macintosh and the Lisa. And his remit is to basically start Apple's entry into this workstation market. And so he's working on a top secret project codenamed the Big Mac. And the goal, what he's trying to do is to take a workstation powered computer, a 3M, and get rid of the 4th M and sell it for $500. He wants to put workstation-esque power into personal computers, make them affordable to everybody, students and individuals. So that's what he's working on. And it's not, unfortunately, going so well. So turns out, with the technology at the time, it's really hard to build these workstation computers with off-the-shelf components and cheaper components. And so Steve isn't doing too good a job. And Sculley and the board are starting to lose faith in him. So in May of 1985, Sculley, the CEO, and Arthur Rock, who is a venture capitalist on the board, be wary of venture capitalists out there.
Says the VC.
Says the venture capitalist. So they decide that enough is enough, and they're going to remove Steve from being in charge of this new division, the SuperMicro division, and they're basically going to just have him, be a figurehead for the company. So they sideline him. His office gets moved across the street to essentially an empty building, and he's still at Apple at this point. He's still the chairman of Apple, but he has no day-to-day responsibilities. And so he refers to this as kind of being he calls it being in Siberia. And so for the summer of 1985, he's just hanging out. He has nothing to do. But he's thinking about this problem. And this goes on for the summer. And an interesting thing happens. So over the summer, while Steve's hanging out, he ends up meeting this guy named Paul Berg. And Paul is a Nobel laureate in chemistry. He's a professor at Stanford in the chemistry department. And he's won the Nobel Prize for chemistry. And he complains to Steve, and he says, hey, like, we've got these workstations, Sun workstations at Stanford, but they're really, really expensive. And I'm trying to teach all these undergrads about DNA and recombinant DNA. And there's no way, like, they can't get enough time on the workstations to use them to model DNA computationally, and wet labs are, like, even more expensive than that. They can't work with it actually, and so they're having a really hard time learning how to do this. And so this just, like, doubly strikes the fire in Steve. Like, he can't handle this. He sees this problem, and so he says, we need to get these powerful computers into the hands of students to be able to learn and build new things, and we need to get the price point down, but we can't compromise on the power.
Yep.
So by the end of the summer, he's been thinking about this. He decides to resign from Apple and start a new company to pursue this vision of finally getting the workstation affordable and merging it with the personal computer.
Now, of course, Apple's business had been selling into education, not necessarily into these, universities that needed these for super horsepower reasons, right? Of doing a lot of really complex
selling
stuff.
To students, selling to computer labs for undergrads and high school students to use.
Right.
That was a big part of their business.
Feels a little competitive.
So here's what happens. September 13th, Jobs resigns, and there have been books written about this and movies, all of which tell slightly different stories. So here's as best we can figure out what happens. Jobs resigns on September 13th, and he tells the board he's going to start a new computer company, and he's going to take several people from the SuperMicro division with him. Those people are Joanna Hoffman. If you saw the Michael Fassbender movie, this is Scarlett Johansson, I think, plays her. She's one of the stars of the movie. Bud Tribble, George Crow, Rich Page, Susan Barnes, Susan Kare, and Dan'l Lewin. So he takes these employees with him, and Apple board says, okay. 2 weeks later, they sue Jobs for two things. One, stealing trade secrets from Apple and employees. And two, a breach of fiduciary duty as the chairman and board member of Apple, basically resigning and then going and starting a new computer company.
So absolutely wasting no time. I mean, for anyone who's been in these environments, a lot of times they drag on, and years later get a cease and desist or things like that. This is immediate action.
Immediate action. Like, company Steve founded, 2 weeks later, boom, lawsuit that Scully hits him with. And this is one of the things that just totally destroys his relationship with Scully. Because it's unclear that it was not good before then, but then he sues him. And so Steve gives this interview in Newsweek, which is awesome. We'll link to this in the show notes. This is right after he leaves Apple. And he says in it, he's asked about this, and he says, it's hard to think that a $2 billion company with 4,300 plus people couldn't compete with 6 people in blue jeans.
Thus is the classic startup story, right?
Classic startup story. So they pretty quickly settle the case. And the terms of the settlement, they settle in January 1986, are that NeXT, the new company Steve is starting, cannot compete with Apple. And Apple gets to review any products that NeXT makes and releases before NeXT releases them. And if they determine them to be competitive, then they can sue again. So Steve's okay with this, but he's just had enough. In February, he sells all of his Apple stock except one share so that he can still go to shareholder meetings. Such a Steve move. So they get underway, and Steve's just had this, wild experience at Apple, and, much ink has been spilled on this. But he decides he really wants to do things his own way this time. Not going to be beholden to an external CEO, not going to be beholden to a board. So what does he do? He spends $100,000 right off. Well, first off, he puts $7 million of his own money into the company to get it started.
Yep.
And he spends $100,000 right off the bat to get a really famous graphic designer and brand consultant.
Paul Rand.
Paul Rand.
Yeah.
to come up with the name and the branding and the logo of this company. And Paul delivers a 100-page brochure naming the company NeXT, all capital except with a lowercase e, which stands for education, and coming up with the logo, which is at
an exact 28-degree angle.
At an exact 28-degree angle. So the NeXT logo is rotated at precisely 28 degrees.
Now, for a lot of people who have commissioned logo work and kind of brand books before, a lot of times there's an iterative process where you get options and you review and you pick from one of the three, things like that. This was, Paul Rand goes away into a cave, comes back with one fully formed idea and says, here you go.
100 pages on this one idea.
And the 100K was delivered up front.
Yeah, insane. But Steve loves it. He goes with it. So the second thing he does, he rents office space. And, they're like a brand new startup. Like, you're going to get a scrappy, co-working space. Like, no, not for Steve. He finds the most expensive real estate in Palo Alto, rents a pretty big office with a staircase in it designed by I.M. Pei, the famous architect, and that's their first office. Later on, they moved to Redwood City into a whole complex designed by I.M. Pei, and they're like Ames chairs everywhere and like $10,000 leather sofas and whatnot. So that's what he does on the setting up the company. He also decides that he has some new management theories that he wants to test out. So the company is not a company, it's a community. And there are members of the community, there aren't employees. This sounds very like Valve, before Valve. And so everybody can see each other's salary in the company. There's complete transparency. But that's not that interesting because there are only two salaries in the company. If you joined before 1986, you made $75,000 a year. If you joined after 1986, you made $50,000 a year. That's it. Everybody.
It's really interesting to think about this in the context of Apple's secrecy now. This was Jobs sort of laying out, okay, we're gonna give this a chance. We're going to let everybody know everything about other employees within the company, about all the secrets of the company, and we're going to see if making them kind of community members allows us to not be so tight with our secrecy. And kind of at the point that was violated, which of course it's going to happen when you start to hit scale, that's when he switched modes and said, nope, the rest of the time, when we go back to Apple, this is going to be an entirely top secret, very controlled top-down organization.
Yep. And what's super, he talks a little bit about this. Like, he'd just come from this political ouster at Apple, and he's trying to avoid politics. And that's like the whole genesis of why he does it this way. And obviously it doesn't really work. But interesting that he does this experiment, and for a long time, NeXT did eventually change this and had different salaries and everything. But he's super idealistic at the get-go, and so the only question is kind of like, well, what is NeXT actually going to do? And it's this big secret. Like, everybody wants to know, what is NeXT doing? Like, they know they're targeting education and they want to make powerful computers, but like, what is it exactly? And around this time, Ross Perot. Of Ross Perot fame, failed presidential candidate, hears about what Steve's up to, and he decides he wants to get involved. And Ross actually, some people know this, but not all, he's actually a technology entrepreneur himself. Mm-hmm. He'd founded two technology companies that were acquired, one by GM and one by Dell eventually. And so he invests $20 million in NeXT at a $125 million valuation. Remember, this is 1986, 87. So,
thinking about with inflation and the fact that they're pre-product, like, this is a company with 150...
They have a brand book.
Yes, exactly. Very expensive logo.
They have an expensive logo and Steve Jobs, nothing else. So, $20 million in 1987 dollars. So they start getting to figure out like what they're going to do. And so they're obviously, the plan is they're just going to build the Big Mac. That Jobs is working on at Apple. So they rent out a big factory in Fremont, California that can produce up to 150,000 machines per year. And they start getting to work. And as they start working on the computer, they're building the hardware, they're building the software. They have to revise the pricing a little bit. So they announce in 1987 that they're going to launch, and it's going to launch at a $3,000 price point. Mm-hmm. So not $500, but also not $10,000 that workstations were normally at that time. So somewhat compelling. Okay. as usual, they announced the launch. They announced it's going to happen. I believe they announced it was going to happen in 1987. It gets delayed. And it gets delayed a long time. So the company basically goes dark. And then late 1988, they emerge again with a big gala event called the NeXT Introduction.
Now, it's interesting to kind of look at the hallmarks of Apple and looking back in this sort of DNA of where they came from. During the NeXT days, they're announcing price points, they're missing them. They're announcing ship dates, they're missing them. That's not a thing that modern Apple does. They were very clearly scarred by this and kind of came out of it and said, that's not what we're going to be.
Yeah, so I mean, nowadays, like, Apple announces an event like 1 week before the actual event. Like, they announced years before they actually launched anything.
But the NeXT Gala, I mean, that sure sounds a lot like the modern Apple keynote.
Yes, and this was one of the, when you look at it at the time, so this is one of the scenes in the Michael Fassbender movie. This is the middle scene, this keynote, when Jobs launches the NeXT computer finally. Everybody's been waiting for this. It's at the Symphony Hall in San Francisco, and it's pretty incredible. So they have a violinist. One of the key features of the NeXT machine, which, by the way, is a 1 foot cube of all black magnesium. So,
of course it is.
Most computers at the time look super ugly, right? And they're huge, and this is also huge, but it is solid black magnesium. And they have it on stage, and they bring a violinist from the symphony up. And one of the key features, like I was saying, is it has digital signal processing, and it can play real audio for one of the first times on a computer.
Instead of kind of the standard 8-bit. A lot of times you'd turn on a computer, you'd hear a beep, it would make Nintendo-like noises. Very different than today.
Yeah, this is real audio. And so the violinist plays a duet with the NeXT computer on stage. And this was, the whole gala, everybody who attended it got a framed poster commemorating this monumental event, the launch of NeXT computer.
Talk about a lack of product market fit. For those of us in startups today that are thinking what's that killer use case that justifies a user actually shelling
Duets
out for
with
my
violinists.
product? Yeah. That's a very expensive tech demo.
Very expensive. And also famously, also chronicled in the movie, nobody from Apple is invited to this. 3,000 people attend the event. Not a single person from Apple is allowed in the doors.
That's just vengeful.
Vengeful. So they announce the actual device, and it's super cool. We'll link to this in the show notes. Somebody a couple years ago got their hands on one of these things, on the initial NeXT computer, and did an unboxing of it. It's on YouTube. It's amazing.
All right, put it in the show notes.
It's in the show notes. So what is this thing? They announced the specs. 25 megahertz Motorola 68030 CPU, whatever that means. 25 megahertz was a lot at the time. Has configurable from 8 megabytes up to 64 megabytes of RAM. So the benchmark for workstations was 1 megabyte of RAM. They have 8 to 64. So knock it out of the park on that. Yep. 17-inch megapixel grayscale display. 10-base-2 Ethernet. This is a networked computer.
And that's key, right? This is something that the Macintosh was not set up to do. I mean, when they had conceived of the Mac early on, it was standalone. I mean, the Ethernet wasn't a thing. We were not living in a world with the Internet or even precursors to the Internet yet. And this is a kind of brand new idea that this computer and this operating system is going to be built to network from the ground up.
The Internet doesn't exist. In fact, the Internet gets invented on this computer, which we'll come to in a second.
The World Wide Web.
The World Wide Web, yes. But the World Wide Web did not exist. And one of the features that they're most proud of about this machine is it has a 256 megabyte magneto-optical drive, which instead of a hard drive, they think this is better technology. Except the problem is they put that in, so there's no hard drive, there's no floppy drive. It's just this big cassette thing you put in there that's magnetic or somehow. That's the only storage on the computer. So you can't transfer anything off the computer because the hard drive that the operating system runs on is the thing that you plug in and out of the computer. And Jobs is but you're networked here on the Ethernet, so that's how you transfer files.
Right.
But nobody else is on the network, so it's kind of a chicken and egg problem.
Right, it's you know where you want to be skating, you know where the puck is going, but there's no ice between you and there.
Yeah, this is like removing the headphone jack in 1988. they realize pretty quickly after launch that that's a bad idea. They ship a new version with an actual hard drive and a floppy disk drive. So they fixed that. But more importantly, and here's where we start to get into like, what is the real value of NeXT? The software and the operating system that they created NeXT over these couple years is just incredible. I mean, there's the moment from when Steve Jobs launches the iPhone in 2007 in the super famous presentation. He says it's 5 years ahead of anything the competition is doing on the market. This was at least 5 years ahead. NeXTSTEP. NeXTSTEP is the operating system that NeXT made for the computer. It's at least 5, if not a decade ahead of anything else anyone's doing.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote-unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So it's worth talking about kind of the technology innovations that came out of NeXT, or at least that NeXT put into production for the first time. A lot of it dates back to when Steve Jobs was at Apple and got the preview from Xerox PARC of what the research technologies were that they'd been working on. And famously, it's the graphical user interface and the mouse.
This is when Steve Jobs raids Xerox PARC in Palo Alto and steals the graphical user interface, and that becomes the Mac. That's what Ben's referring to.
Yeah, and so the Mac gets that right. For the first time, there's Bill Gates famously kind of freaked out at the demo watching the drawing on screen where the Mac is moving the mouse and it's moving around slowly. And Steve's saying, yes, we got this from Xerox PARC. What they didn't kind of pull from that was object-oriented programming. Yeah. So in traditional programming, like you look at the way that DOS was running, there's routines and it's moving. It's kind of advancing linearly. There's branching to subroutines, and for the first time with object-oriented programming, you have the ability for software to model real-world objects. And so this dog has properties and has methods you can call on those properties, like bark or like back up or like walk forward. And this was only really embodied in Smalltalk at the time, which was not a very popular language.
Well, and to not dive too deep into the technical details here, but essentially this is like all modern software is now written this way.
Right.
The idea of creating software technology using old linear non-object oriented programming, like you just like wouldn't do it. That'd be like trying to like drive across country in like a golf cart. Like you wouldn't do it.
So the kind of breakthrough here is by using Objective-C, which is incredible how long that has actually lived, licensed at NeXT, and then eventually became kind of the core tool set that's used to now develop Mac applications and iOS applications. Swift is being adopted, but Objective-C is still the bread and butter of Apple's software development, it enabled NeXT to move much faster than traditional programming methods, and for people to build much more complex programs that they would otherwise.
And Steve has this great quote. So when he finally comes back to Apple after the acquisition a couple years later, the first time he's on stage at the first Apple keynote, right after Apple acquires NeXT.
This is January 97.
January 97. He says, I want to tell you guys a story. Steve's famous for telling a story. And he says, when I went, this is a quote from him, when I went to Xerox PARC in 1979 and saw the original genesis of the graphical user interface there, they actually showed me three things. And I was so blinded by the first that I didn't hang around to find out about the other two. And it took me years to rediscover them. The first, of course, was the graphical user interface. But the other two things, the second was object-oriented programming. They had it all running back in 1979. And the third was networking. They had several hundred Altos. Alto was the concept computer that Xerox PARC had designed. They had several hundred Altos hooked up to network printing, network file service, email, all in 1979. If I'd only stayed there for another 20 minutes. He's making a joke, but what he realizes, and this kind of goes back to what he was trying to do with the Big Mac, it's the combination of those three things. It's the graphical user interface, it's object-oriented programming that allows software developers to develop really powerful, very useful graphical programs for the first time, and then it's networking. And that's what's going to enable this new wave of computing. And
it's probably worth fast-forwarding at this point.
Yeah.
So NeXT kind of cuts their losses. There comes a point where NeXT says, you know what, this hardware thing, it's hard. We have extremely expensive computers that aren't selling very well. They only ever sold 50,000 units in total.
And by the way, when the thing finally came out to retail, guess how much it cost?
$10,000?
$10,000, which was the price that all workstations cost at the time. So nobody buys these things.
Yeah. So NeXT decides, okay, we're going to be a software company. And what they do is they kind of separate out NeXTSTEP, which was the operating system, and then they had kind of the mock kernel underneath, which they sort of brought in-house. They separated that out and they said, okay, we're just going to start selling this thing to other computer manufacturers, right? We're not going to be what we know of Apple today is an entirely vertically integrated software and hardware company. They're moving away from that. It's just software. And that was kind of in vogue during that time because that's when the Mac was in the era of the clones. I mean, the Mac OS ran on other people's hardware, which is totally mind-blowing for those of us today who know, well, what do you mean? iOS only runs on iPhones.
Yep. And but it's super important, and because of the power of this operating system, and we mentioned earlier, but just to give a sense of like what is the real implication of this power. The World Wide Web is invented on this operating system, on a NeXT computer, actually. So Tim Berners-Lee at CERN invents the World Wide Web, and it's possible because of object-oriented programming and networking, obviously. Right. And also fun, other history of this computer. John Carmack at id Software, John's now the CTO, I believe, of Oculus. John wrote the video games Doom, Quake, and Wolfenstein 3D all on NeXT.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
Wow. I didn't
and those
know
were
that.
the first 3D games that, ever, equally revolutionized the game industry.
Yep.
So that's the power that this enables.
Yeah, and it's interesting kind of taking a step back and realizing, okay, so very clear recognition of the technologies that were going to be transformational and really like the foundation of what the future of computing will be, really unable to bring it to market in a meaningful way at NeXT. I mean, all the ideas were right, all the way that they brought a product to customers, you can chalk it up to timing, you could chalk it up to price, like just wrong, just poorly executed. And so they needed an out.
Yep, they needed an out, and so they pivoted eventually to just selling software. They stopped selling hardware. They do that in 1993. It's funny, one of the pieces of software they come out with is this thing called WebObjects, which is one of the first internet application servers. And Dell actually builds their e-commerce site on it. So when you bought a Dell, you're like, dude, you're getting a Dell? Like, that was powered by NeXT.
Basically what WebObjects do is they make it so that, how you go to a website and it's not always the same as every other time you go to that website? It's got dynamic content on it. WebObjects was like the first ever system to do that.
And this thing is like still in use. So the iTunes store, people wonder why iTunes like is so clunky and slow and crappy today. It still runs on web objects, which is insane.
Yeah, for any of the iOS developers and the Mac developers listening, for better or for worse, a lot of these technologies have stayed with us for a very, very long time.
For a very long time. So finally, meanwhile, while this is going on, Apple is just like, they have lost their way.
Yeah.
They are getting creamed in the market. On the PC front, this is the era of Windows in the early 90s to mid 90s, Windows 3.0, then Windows 95.
Just absolute
Apple's
dominance.
Getting decimated. They have no offering for enterprises in the workstation market, which is cooling down, but like still a huge market.
And all of NT was doing phenomenally well. Steve Jobs in 97 stands up on stage in January and praises the incredible
Microsoft
advancements brought by Microsoft and NT
Yep.
and says, Apple, what's Apple been doing? We've fallen behind.
Yep.
And of course, easy for him to blame while he's not at the company, but incredible to be.
But he was totally right.
Yep.
And so Apple's casting about, they're trying to create a next generation operating system. By this point in time, everybody's recognized the power of what we're talking about, and Apple just can't do it. They have 2 competing projects, 3 at various points, trying to build a modern operating system. They all fail.
It's wild to think about. I mean, you can chalk it up to organizational politics, or you can chalk it up to the technology just being incredibly hard, but they were building an operating system codenamed, I think Copeland was the first version, and then they were going to have a second release called Gershwin. There was kind of projects going on in parallel for how are we going to build a next generation operating system, and they just couldn't do it. And honestly, it kind of reminds me of the Longhorn days at Microsoft.
Oh, God.
It turns out operating systems are hard, and organizations are even harder.
Yep.
And so you look at Apple, and eventually they kind of said, okay, enough is enough. We're going to look elsewhere to try and buy. And they had a couple options.
They had a couple options for a modern operating system they could buy to replace Mac OS X, OS 9.
It was System 7 at the time.
Right.
The future operating system was supposed to be Mac OS 8, which ended up just being an incremental bump, and then OS 9, which was another incremental bump.
Yep.
And then finally, what they were envisioning for years, not even until 2001, was Mac OS 10.
Yeah. And so just before Christmas, 1996, they buy NeXT. Steve Jobs for $429 million that go to NeXT shareholders, including Ross Perot, and separately 1.5 million shares of Apple stock that go to Steve Jobs.
Yeah. So David, you want to talk about that as a VC? What's based on a return on invested capital? How was the NeXT exit?
Well, over its lifetime, NeXT raised. So they raised the money from Jobs. They raised the money from Ross Perot. Canon, the large camera printer computer manufacturer, ends up investing another kind of $100 to $130 million in the company as well. So they got sold for more money than they raised, but like not that much more money. Like this was not a home run exit. Like nobody was getting rich off NeXT. And Steve gets 1.5 million shares of Apple stock because he's going to come on board at Apple as a consultant. So he's going to come and like help Apple with this transition is the official plan.
Right.
And so the acquisition closes in February 1997, and Steve's a consultant, and some of these events that we were talking about, he comes on stage and he, clearly like the dichotomy between how Steve talks about the future and his vision, and how Gil Amelio, who was the CEO of Apple at the time, who, looked like he actually was like quite technical and had been at Fairchild Semiconductor and all that, but he looked like he'd never met a developer in his life. Like,
yeah, when you watch their keynotes, just kind of going back and watching a lot of these old keynotes over again, in preparing for this podcast, it is incredible to see the dichotomy between Gil standing up there and not really commanding the audience's attention and saying things that
like it's so important for Apple to court our core audience and developers.
Right. It's just it's not taking a position on anything. And
Yep.
we've all seen managers like that or leaders like that don't really take a side, and you walk out and you're like, well, I didn't disagree with any of that, but I wasn't inspired. And then Steve comes on stage for just a few minutes to say like, hey, here's where I think we're going, and it's just captivating.
It's night and day, and like huge applause, and so pretty quickly, acquisition closes in February. Over the July 4th weekend, Steve convinces the board of Apple that Gil has no idea what he's doing,
Yeah.
and he needs to go. And the next week, the board fires Gil, so the company doesn't have a CEO. They start a CEO search, really, there's only one candidate. September of 1997, Steve Jobs is instated as the interim.
The ICEO.
The ICEO, the interim CEO of Apple. And he remained interim CEO until 2000. So for 3 years, he was interim CEO.
Now, while he's interim CEO, the board doesn't exactly stay intact, right? He
basically takes those 3 years, and it ultimately takes 5 years from the time Apple acquires NeXT for OS X to come out. So they spend 5 years building, taking the NeXT operating system and baking it into the full product of the Mac. But during that time, I mean, Steve, there's the technical and product challenges of shipping that, but he cleans house and completely revamps Apple.
Well, there's a good. I looked up the article that came up on CNET the day that the acquisition was announced, and kind of how people were billing it at the time. And
kind of awesome that when this acquisition happened, CNET existed, was a website, was a news organization,
and there's still archives.
And the World Wide Web was invented on NeXT computers 5 years earlier.
I know. So the thing that they say in the article is NeXT's cross-platform development environments in the enterprise and internet and intranet space allow developers to write once and deploy across a range of internet and client-server platforms. Amelio said that Apple expects to ship products with the NeXT operating system in 1997. That's the same year that the acquisition closed. So the way that Amelio was looking at this is, we're going to get this company, we're going to start kind of integrating their technologies, we're going to keep shipping our products.
We'll just slap this OS into our hardware, no big deal.
And what we know today is it didn't ship in 97 or 98 or 90, it shipped in 2001. And by that point, Apple had dramatically less products. I mean, this is the time where there's developers at 1997 Worldwide Developer Conference in July, 6 months after the acquisition closed, saying to Steve, "Hey, so I worked on OpenDoc for many years, and we've invested a lot in it. What about OpenDoc?" And Steve says, "Yeah, a lot of you worked on things that we had to put a bullet in the head of. And I feel your pain," and continues to go on and then paint the story of Apple has no focus. Focus is about saying no. We're doing all these different things. It's not iterative improvements that we need to do. It's dramatic changes. So what's really interesting is to look at screenshots from NeXT or NeXTSTEP, or actually OPENSTEP, the operating system that they ended up implementing, and you look at OS X today, or even steps along the way.
Yeah.
It is incredible how many pieces of NeXT you can find of NeXTSTEP you can find in Mac OS X. I mean, you look at NeXT and it had a dock. Nothing else had a dock at the time. That was a new UI paradigm.
It's amazing how many pieces of NeXT you can find in your iPhone.
Right.
In your Apple Watch.
Right.
It's there.
In 97, Steve is demoing the NeXTSTEP development toolchain, and he's like, here's Interface Builder, and here's all these tools that people still use today to develop iPhone apps. So the very core fundamentals of what makes what made the iPhone possible came from the NeXT acquisition.
Yep. So at this point, wrapping up the history and facts, which was very long, but these stories are we love stories on this show. And
this is one of the best
This is one of the greatest of all time. So we all know what happens. Steve comes back. 2001, they launch OS X. They launch the iPod. When did they launch the iPod? Was it also 2001, I think, when they launched the iPod?
Yep.
They launched the iPod. Then they launched the iPhone. Then they launched the iPad. Then they launched the Apple. All this stuff.
Yep, Apple TV.
And it's all NeXT.
The incredible thing is, when they first launched the iPhone, they say, and it runs OS X. That was a big selling point. This is not a phone like we know phones today with an embedded operating system. This is a computer in your pocket. And to prove it, it's running a variant of the operating system that exists on your computers. Yep. And that was huge and ridiculous. And people at BlackBerry didn't believe it. They'd look at the scroll performance and say, you can't do that on a phone. We just don't believe you. And so I think that when you look at this was before it was dubbed iOS. Okay, it was a variant of OS 10. And then when they launched the iPad, they say, and we're renaming it iOS. It runs on the iPhone and the iPad. Then they launched the watch. Then they launched the TV. All these things are kind of built off that same Darwin kernel and the core of what they acquired in NeXT.
Yep, and there we go. The rest, as they say, is history.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you.
Let's move on to our next segment of the show, which is acquisition category.
Yeah.
This will be a fun one. What do you think?
Well,
And what we do is we categorize the acquisition into, we've got a couple of categories and we decide which it represents.
yeah, so we normally decide if something's a product acquisition, a business line acquisition, a people acquisition, which oftentimes happens in kind of like acqui-hires, a technology acquisition. Is it a core piece of technology that's not productized? Or is it, other? Is it some new thing? And when you look at this, like Apple had been trying to create a technology that they really couldn't create. It was a next generation operating system with multitasking, with networking, with protected memory, all these different things. But it's not the technology they acquired. You'd be silly to make the case that this was anything but Steve Jobs. I mean, this is like
a great slide.
The ultimate people acquisition. Oh yeah, Gil Amelio is listing all the reasons they acquired NeXT.
The CEO at the time, literally is it at Macworld, I think?
Yeah.
Has this slide on stage. He's presenting these slides about, rationale for the next acquisition, and he has like all this stuff that they're getting. Then he flips to the next slide.
And it just says Steve Jobs. It's like the only thing on
It's
the
the only
slide.
thing on the
like,
slide.
Reasons we acquired NeXT. So, I mean, yes, we're still using NeXT technologies today. Yes, they were incredibly forward-thinking, but the company needed Steve back.
Yep. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Steve is, I'm just surprised. I mean, like, I've read all the books about him. I've watched so many of his keynotes. I've watched all the movies about him. Every time I read it, and this just like going in and doing a lot of this primary source research, this is going to be my tech theme later, but I am just so struck by like his level of thinking. It is so rare that you find something like that. And when you watch this keynote with Gil on stage and Steve on stage at the same time, and like I said, Gil was at Fairchild Semiconductor. He had been, a longtime technology CEO.
Yeah, he turned around National Semiconductor. He's credited
he turned around National Semiconductor. He looks like a child compared to this guy. Like
Wow.
It's like Steve is just a man among boys, a person among small people.
Yeah, special guy. We miss him.
Totally. Okay.
So you want to go into what would have happened otherwise?
Yeah, this is fun. So what would have happened otherwise? I think it'd be fun to talk about the other option that Apple had.
Yeah, so Jean-Louis Gasset, was an Apple employee who kind of opened Europe to Apple. He came in the early days, knew Steve Jobs well, left Apple to start his own company.
Before he left Apple, when Steve got fired and left Apple, Jean took over the SuperMicro division. He literally replaced Steve Jobs.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he literally replaced. So this is he's French, Jean-Louis. Great guy. He has a blog now, which is awesome. Monday Note. And he replaced Steve Jobs. But then he left and started his own company.
So two people that both kind of walked through that revolving door of that division of Apple, both went and started very, very similar companies.
Yeah.
And B, which created BOS, was kind of the other candidate they were vetting other than NeXT. And ultimately, the reason that Apple didn't end up making that acquisition of B, number one, I continue to go back to the fact that they all sort of knew they needed Steve back, but they just couldn't come to the same agreement on price. Jean-Louis wanted $300 million for the company. Apple, I think, was willing to shell out $120, $125, somewhere in there.
Something like that. Yep.
And they just couldn't get the deal done, as with many other deals. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have been involved with.
Yeah. But kind of amazing that there were these two operating systems that Apple could have acquired
and should have built in house, right? Like both of those leaders were
had been at Apple,
right? They were chartered with building this, and the organizational politics at Apple at the time didn't let it happen.
This is why Steve Jobs hated politics.
Did you see that NeXT was planning an IPO?
Yes. That was one of the kind of bargaining chips on the table.
Yeah, so this company that finally had actually has a product out there, this operating system that is not the business that they were hoping to build, but is a decent business. Is planning to IPO later in the year, and we don't know if that actually would have happened, but it is interesting that that's an alternate future for.
Yeah. I think there must have been a little bit of Steve Jobs reality distortion field there too, like how they could have gone public. I mean, they eventually became profitable as a software only business, but they were not making a lot of money.
No.
But he was Steve Jobs.
Right.
Anyway, so they ended up getting acquired, obviously, by Apple, not going public, but that would have been interesting had they.
Yeah, I'm gonna paint this picture as NeXT had a fighting chance, but probably would not have done very well in the long term. And I don't think Apple would be in business.
Yeah, no. They were getting creamed.
Yeah.
I mean, there was that famous quote, right? Who said, was it Michael Dell?
Yeah.
Said that they should just shut down the company and give the money back to shareholders. They were just getting creamed.
Yeah.
So, all right. Tech themes?
Tech themes. Yeah. So, the big one for me is you hear this all the time in investor pitches. It's all about the people. I think this is one that's just so clearly illustrative of. We often talk about 10x engineers. Sometimes there's just 10x leaders and people that are truly inspiring. And then the other part of that is how much of a difference it makes to have the founder of a company leading that company. That they command a different level of respect from employees. And when they say this is our strategy, people believe it, and people do crazy things and march to those orders. And the other thing that I was kind of thinking about in this is Steve makes a plea to developers to start building on this new operating system that they're building that will eventually sort of in some forked way become Mac OS 10. And you don't win, as Microsoft can see with Windows Phone recently, or a lot of people trying to start sort of competing app stores and things like that. It's really hard to win over a developer ecosystem. And it's really hard to say, developers, we're open for business. This is a platform for you. And Steve managed to really make the plea in a very authentic way and say, hey, everyone who's a Mac developer, why don't you come and you're gonna have to rewrite a lot of stuff because this is very different, but make a bet on us and develop your applications.
Well, we can give you this
Mac
power,
OS 10.
This power in this operating system that you couldn't have otherwise.
Right, right. But to me, it's the power, the power of a founder there, and then once you have a tipping point in the network effects that come from building an ecosystem on a platform, that you can kind of just keep rolling with that, and the big bargaining chip that affords you.
Yep. That perfectly dovetails with, I have two tech themes for, on the show we do. This is actually my favorite segment of the show. We talk about, having gone through this whole history, what are some eternal truths about just the way business, technology, startups, operate, that we can kind of pull out of this. And I have two. The first one is just what you were saying, Ben, is that or related to what you're saying, in technology, like there's this concept of like iteration, not just iteration, but like you're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. And a lot of the history and facts, like we talked about a lot of pretty deeply technical stuff, like object-oriented programming and networking and workstations. And like, you think about tech companies today, it's like Snapchat and like, you know, messaging and interacting with your friends and like spectacles and like doing this amazing stuff and flying drones and like, but all that's only possible because of these like building blocks at the operating system level, at the deep geeky stuff that needed to be built and installed first. So that's one. But two is something I've been thinking a lot about, also related to your first one. Like what made Steve what he was, right? And we haven't released our last episode yet, but we interviewed Kathleen Phillips, who's the CFO of Zillow, talking about the Truly acquisition. And in a follow-up on that, we talked about Snapchat spectacles, and I referenced this tweet that we both read that I thought was super cool, that Bill Gurley had retweeted and commented on when Snapchat announced spectacles. And John Collison, who's one of the brothers who's the co-founder of Stripe, he tweeted, quote, "I'm always impressed by how flamboyantly original Snapchat are. Ghost codes, invisible UI, filters, sunglasses." And Gurley responds and he says, "That's a really great thing to identify and recognize." And I've been thinking about that because I totally agree. But like, what is that originality? And it's not really exactly originality. Like, there were QR codes before Snapchat did them. Mm-hmm. There were
in fact,
glasses.
Snapchat acquired a company to do that.
They acquired a company doing it. There were glasses you wore on your face,
right?
And that took video before Snapchat spectacles. There were messengers before them. They weren't first, but they were the first thus far, and we'll see how spectacles perform. The first to make like a real product that just works and is delightful and solves a need for a user. And I think that's what this originality means. And that's what Steve was, right? Like object-oriented programming, all this stuff existed at Xerox PARC before NeXT. Object-oriented programming, networking, like all this stuff was out there, workstations, blah, blah. But like, it was technology. It wasn't a product.
Right.
It wasn't something that like you plugged it in and it just worked and it delighted you and it solved your need. And I think that's like, I don't know, I've just been noodling, especially like as a VC, like this is what we look for. So many times we meet founders, we meet companies, and they're doing something cool that's hard technically. And the question is just like, okay, like the question I always ask is like, what data do you have? What signal do you have that people want this? And so many times you get this like blank stare back, you know?
We're like, well, what do you mean this was never possible before?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's not what I asked.
That's not what I asked. Like, why are people going to use this? And I think that's what these, whether it's Evan Spiegel at Snapchat, whether it's Steve Jobs, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or, any of these, or Instagram, right? Like Instagram was not the first app that made your photos look good.
No.
Hipstamatic made your photos look good.
Yep.
But that's not Instagram, like it's building this whole solution and having the vision to do that.
And I think it's a famously difficult task to take hard, complicated problems that are solved in sort of research lab-like environments and get those into a mass market product. I mean, you look at let's take two super famous examples. Microsoft has like hundreds or 1,000 of PhDs at Microsoft Research that do incredible work and do pioneering research, and they try their best to partner with product teams, but it's not super often that one of those things gets surfaced in a product in a big way. And the company's growing and it's getting way better at that, but it's like a famously difficult problem to sit in the organization in the right way to make your kind of very forward-looking things that may dangerously obsolete your current thing. Something that you bring back into product. And in fact, when Apple, my second example is when Steve went back to Apple, they had kind of an advanced technology division. And that was purely for it was a research lab. It was people that were kind of playing around with like, what if we could get this into a computer at some point, and dismantled that.
Yeah,
and
Steve killed that.
And
that's totally the opposite of what we're talking about.
Right, you want to get those things into product and kind of reorganized and said, look, everybody who's doing that pioneering research, you need to be doing it with the lens of how are we going to build this into this product and how does it fit into the story of this product that we're trying to ship.
Yep. And I think that is what is so scarce in technology, in startups, and in in business, like the ability to take a potentiality, whether it's technology or something else, and turn that into a product that like just works and that people want. It's so scarce. And I think that's what, for all of Steve's foibles and all his craziness, and like, he was just so good at that. And it's impressive. So,
yeah.
Okay. Should we wrap this one up?
You want to grade it?
Let's grade it. we were going back and forth on text over this last night.
Yeah. So, a couple episodes ago, we did the Android acquisition by Google, and you look and you can kind of figure out the main reason for Android to be there is to make it so that when people are searching on mobile, they're not always searching from iPhones, and Google doesn't have to pay Apple for all those searches. So that gives them like $4 billion a year in revenue they otherwise would have had to give up. Big number, right? Like for kind of a small acquisition. So I want to like talk about the NeXT acquisition and what it did for Apple in the context of that being an A+, of kind of like saving the company $4 billion a year. There was leaked things in the Oracle trial that Android as a division has made about $31 billion since being acquired. When you look at the things that have happened at Apple since the NeXT acquisition, it's like a sci-fi story compared to those numbers. Like if that was our bar for A+, Apple does like $250 billion a year in revenue now. And like probably would have gone out of business, number one, if this acquisition didn't happen. They're the most valuable company in the world, as David said. Not only would they have like gone out of business and now this reverse course, the technology that they acquired in NeXT is core and fundamental to every single product that they ship today. It's the core of the Mac, the core of all the iOS devices, everything we've been talking about. And I mean, developers who are listening to this will like, you use Interface Builder, and like Steve demoed Interface Builder as a feature of the NeXT development platform in 1997. I mean, these things continue to ship.
Yep.
And it is we were talking about this before the show. Apple has done approximately $1 trillion in revenue
since Steve came back.
Steve came back.
Give or take $1 billion, a trillion. It's like GDP style.
I know. And I wish we had, we have nothing higher to give than an A+, but this is by far the best acquisition we've ever looked at, and I think probably ever will look at.
Yeah. It is hard to argue with that. I mean, what's funny, like, this is such a, like, illustrates, like, it's better to be lucky than good, Like, Gil Amelio completed the single greatest acquisition of all time. Gil Amelio. Who is Gil Amelio?
He's the George Lazenby of Apple CEOs.
Exactly. Like, nothing against Gil Amelio, but like, what's so funny is like, he didn't see any of this. Like, this was not some brilliantly crafted move on his part, like brilliantly crafted on Steve's part. But yeah, I mean, like, this is just the sheer numbers. You cannot argue. I don't think you can argue that this isn't the greatest acquisition of all time. I mean, it literally created $1 trillion in revenue. Like, that's just goofy.
That's like a fake number.
That's a fake number. When we were texting last night, I texted Ben. I was like, it's like, you were like,
you mean we iMessaged last night?
Yeah, we iMessaged last night, and it's like Steve changed the game on the field, and it's like, yeah, like they were playing football, and like Apple was like behind by like 30 points in the fourth quarter, and Steve like ran a play that scored 1,000-point touchdown. Like, you just can't. You can't figure. So yeah, A+, like, for sure. No doubt.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
You want to talk about Carve Outs?
Yeah, let's do Carve Outs quickly.
Cool.
Go ahead.
This really made me think. It was a great podcast I listened to in the last week. The Ezra Klein Show is one of my favorite podcasts. He interviews people. He's the creator and editor-in-chief at Vox, I believe. And he has great guests on that range from all different walks of life. And of course, I listen to the episodes that are particularly nerdy. And so he had Stuart Butterfield on, who is the creator of Flickr and now Slack. And Stuart's just a phenomenally interesting character with a philosophy background and raises a lot of really interesting points. about Slack, about how they got there, about the founder journey, a lot about the similarities and differences of, he started two companies that started as a kind of crazy out there, never-ending game and ended up being a super widely used consumer product, and talking about sort of how they got there. And one of the interesting points that he brought up was that when they were building what would eventually become Slack, they used IRC and then built all kinds of tools on top of IRC.
I didn't know they used IRC.
Yeah, they actually did. So all this criticism of like, it's just IRC, like it actually is just IRC. So when they were starting out building that,
Snapchat's just QR codes. Like,
I know, right?
This is the point.
They had a team of developers, and it was 3 technical co-founders and someone else they hired, and they would encounter these problems with chat when it was like, okay, we should build something to make this chat thing a little better. So they'd pull those developers off of product, and they'd spend a couple cycles and make their thing that would become Slack a little bit better, and then they'd go back, and then it had a lot of bake time. They'd use it for like 3 or 4 months, and then they'd go in and say, we actually need to make it a little bit better, and they'd go and make it a little bit better. And when you compare that sort of product development where a person is solving their own need very, very directly and an acute pain point with the way that product organizations often work, which is like the PM will propose the product and they'll have the spec and there'll be divergent ideas and people will argue over it. There's a lot more ego in the room. And what Stuart's thrown out there is, when we're just trying to solve our own problems and like nobody wins by having our internal tool be better, except that sort of everyone wins, there's a lot less ego in the equation. And it's kind of an interesting way to develop software. And, we're not all going to go and set out to start very expensive, never-ending games to create a different product. But it is like interesting to think about how can we kind of spoof that environment where we're all users of the product, we're all using it to solve our own pain point internally, and take the ego out of the equation.
That's super cool. I got to listen to that podcast, the Ezra Klein Show.
Ezra Klein Show with
Awesome.
guest Stuart Butterfield.
Awesome. Mine for the week is this super fun Verge, an eye-opening Verge article, big investigative piece that they did last week or the week before on DJI, the drone company. DJI released or announced their new product, the Mavic Pro. This thing is amazing. It's the size of a water bottle, and it's a drone, and it flies for 27 minutes. You can fly it 4.5 miles away from you with rock solid 1080p video.
Whoa.
It fits in your pocket. Like, it's amazing. But they went and they were like, did this profile of like, what is DJI? It's this company. It's based in Shenzhen. And who are they? How do they hire? And it turns out that DJI runs this robot wars competition. So like, you ever seen like BattleBots?
Yeah.
They do a university competition in China. That's like the most coolest BattleBots you've ever seen. And they get teams from 200 universities in China to create teams. And this is like, NCAA football of China. And then they come, they work for, forever. And then they come and they compete. And the winners, DJI just hires them. and so they get like the smartest people. And this is all about like robotics and machine vision and autonomously operated robots. So like the rules of the game are that you can't see what's happening on the field. You have to rely on your robot sensors, and most of it's autonomously driven. And they fight each other and their goals and stuff. And so as a result, DJI now has over 1,000 PhDs working on computer vision and machine understanding. And that's all baked into stuff like enabling this drone, the size of a water bottle, that you can do stuff like you can just tap on yourself on the image and then it'll track you. Like, it knows who you are. Wow. It can follow you as you run around, and it won't crash into anything. It has sense and avoid, all just done with computer vision. And it was like this glimpse of the future. And then when they interview Frank Wang, the CEO of DJI, he's like, yeah, this is about robotics. Like, drones, it's our first product, but we're going to build robots that are going to do agriculture and serve you in restaurants, all this stuff. Right. This is the future of robotics. It felt a little bit like, Steve Jobs' Xerox PARC moment. It was pretty cool.
Nice.
So we'll link to it in the show notes.
We will.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, StatSig.
Yes, long-time acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on StatSig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where StatSig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks especially to the GeekWire folks for having us and for setting this all up. Really appreciate it. And if you're new to the show and would like to subscribe, find us on iTunes or your favorite podcast client. Tweet at us at AcquiredFM. And have a good one.
Who got the truth? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Who got the truth now? Huh?